Welcome to Veterans Chronicles. I'm Greg Corombos. Our guest this week is Scott Taylor. He's a U.S. Navy veteran and also a U.S. Navy SEAL and sniper. He is also a veteran of Operation Iraqi Freedom. From 2017 to 2019, he also served as a member of Congress from Virginia, specializing in national security issues. Our conversation took place during his time in Congress, and we began by discussing his early years, where he was born and raised, all the way through the excruciating test to become a U.S. Navy SEAL.
So I was born in Baltimore, but I was raised on Maryland's Eastern Shore, so a small no-stoplight town called Hebron on the shore, and raised by a single mother and working on a farm pretty young.
Was there a history of military service in your family?
My grandfathers both served. So my mother's father served in World War II, and my father's father served in Vietnam. But it wasn't, we weren't close to them or anything like that. And quite frankly, my mother's father served in World War II. Neither one of them never talked. They never talked about it. So it wasn't something that was like close to me. I'm not even sure what the catalyst was initially that made me want to serve. But I did want to be a Marine initially, and then that I read a Dick Marcinko book, who was a former SEAL author, and then watched that cheesy Charlie Sheen movie, Navy SEALs, and decided I wanted to be a SEAL.
So the minute you joined the Navy, you knew you wanted to be a SEAL.
I was in high school, and I actually signed up for the delayed entry program in the Navy at 17, and I already knew that I wanted to be a SEAL. Never mind, I couldn't swim that well, or I had no idea how to do a side stroke, but I learned it pretty quickly.
In training or before you enlisted?
What's funny is so there were two swim strokes that you're able to do for the test. It was breaststroke and side stroke. So I was a wrestler, and there was a wrestler that I used to wrestle a couple of times. He was a lifeguard at the YMCA, and he actually taught me how to do breaststroke. But then when I got to boot camp, when we were going to take the test, they were like, "We don't use breaststroke, we use side stroke." So I literally learned side stroke in boot camp. Somebody just showed me out of the water. He just showed me what to do, and I passed the swim with it. But I didn't really have a swimmer's background, and so swimming sucked. But
So compared to the cheesy Charlie Sheen movie, and I guess the book probably gave you kind of a real life view of what being a SEAL was like, and the training especially, do you feel like you were ready for the training? What was it like when reality finally hit you with that?
I'm not sure if you're ever ready for that training, but the book it certainly talked about the hardness of it, of course, and the challenges for yourself, and something that at that age I've always wanted to test myself, and I really wanted to test my mettle, basically. As an 18-year-old, because I went there right out of the gate, I was the youngest guy in there. In fact, I think I was the youngest SEAL, not ever, but at the time when I went through. But when you're that old, your life is like this, right? When you get a little older, it opens up a little bit, but it just seemed like every single evolution in Bloods was completely overwhelming. So it was, let me get through this exercise, let me get through lunch, let me get through the next one. And every morning you wake up at 4 a.m. and I'm like, this sucks, I want to get out of here. However, everyone in that little small town knew what I was going to do, so there was no way that I was going to let these folks make me ring a bell 3 times and quit. You would have had to kill me.
How long does the training last?
It's about just over 6 months. That first, the BUDS training, basic underwater demolition SEAL training, is about 6 months, and then there's more in the pipeline, but that's really what the notorious SEAL training is, about 6 months.
So you never seriously thought about dropping out? I'm sure others did who are in the program.
Well, we started out with roughly, and my numbers are hazy, but we started out right around 160 something maybe, and we graduated with 20 originals. So many people decided that it wasn't for them, and it sucks. So it's you definitely have to. It's as physical as it is, because it's very physical. It's ultimately it's more mental. And no, I never seriously thought about quitting. I thought about it every day, probably multiple times a day, but there was never a serious thought that was going to bring me to ring a bell 3 times and say I quit.
What was the toughest part? Was it the swimming, or was it something far different?
Swimming was definitely tough. The cold was tough. You're hypothermic a lot. You're in the cold water, so that was very, very tough as well. I think I would probably say for me personally the toughest thing was probably what's called pool comp. So swimming was tough, right? But I'm a runner, and you could power through the swimming. If you were not a good runner, running was probably really tough for you, because it probably added about 20% of the energy you had to expel to get through there. Because if you weren't a good runner and they do these conditioning runs and you're at the back, they would do what's called the goon squad, and they would make you do more activities and buddy carries and sprints and all that stuff like that. I never had that problem. But for me, swimming was tough, but we made it through. But pool comp was probably the toughest thing. And pool comp is where you're about 15 feet underwater, and you have all your diving gear on, and you're sitting there on your knees underwater. And if folks know what dive rigs are now, diving hoses are very like thin, and before they used to have those types of thin hoses, they had these elastic ones that were thick. And so you're down there with those elastic hoses and your whole dive rig, and the instructor comes down, puts his foot on your back. First he like beats the hell out of you and everything. Your mask is there, your air is gone, so you're on a breath hold now. And then he puts his foot on your back, takes those elastic hoses and ties them in a knot. And on that breath hold, and while you're getting the crap beat out of you, you got to get your rig off, take it off there, and you have to think, have a little bit of clarity in that chaos, and untie that knot and bring it back to be able to get your breath hold, and then put your uniform back on, or your dive rig, and make sure that there's no twists in the straps or anything like that. That was tough, and I failed it the first 2 times, and then that was a sort of a make or break thing, and then I passed it.
So you get 3 cracks at it?
I think you get it's either 3 or 4. Okay, it's my mind escapes me, but that was probably the single toughest thing I think for me. But like I said, swimming was always tough every week. It just sucked.
Did you know it was coming? Did they give you a chance to prepare for any of this, or did they just say show up at this time and here's what we're doing?
For the pool comp, there were many evolutions that I wasn't prepared for necessarily. I mean, it was always safe. They always make things safe and they brief it and stuff like that. But certainly, like I said, coming in right out of high school as an 18-year-old, a lot of these experiences and these things I'd never done before. So it was just, again, like I said earlier, you're looking at, okay, how do I get past this evolution right here? Of course, I've never had my hands and feet tied behind my back in drown proofing, where you have to swim and do that with your hands and feet tied right here. I've never done that before, of course. There were many things that were like that, but you just figured it out and sucked it up and went through.
Wow. So what did it feel like when it was all over and you were among the 20 or so that made it through?
It was awesome. I mean, it was definitely a huge sense of accomplishment for my family. It was great. I'd never flown on a plane before I went out to boot camp. My mother had never flown on a plane either until she came out to come see me graduate SEAL training. So for her, it was a great experience, and then, therefore for me it was as well. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with Big Brothers and Big Sisters, that mentorship program, but you and I wouldn't be speaking right now if it wasn't for a big brother in my life, Andy. So again, I had a single mother, and I was in trouble very early on, and 11 on probation already at 12, I think. So he really was a catalyst that instilled self-confidence in me and self-worth, and really guided me on the correct path. So my big brother was at SEAL graduation as well, and the rest of my family was too. So it was a huge accomplishment that I think that my family was proud, and therefore I was as well.
Outstanding. So when is this? Is late 90s?
This is 98. Yep, 1998.
1998. And so how soon after that did you get deployed on one of those secret SEAL missions?
So the first, you still have to go through a pipeline. And at the time, in the 90s, it was, and early 2000s, it was, you go through BUDS, and then you go through jump school down in Fort Benning with the Army. That's different now, but that's how it was then. And then you go to a team, and you're still not a SEAL yet. So today is a little bit different. You're a SEAL faster. You had to go to a team, and you had to pass an oral, written, and practical board. So you're on a 6 months probation time frame. So you go through BUDS, you go through jump school, you go to the team, you're on the 6 months probationary period. Inside of that probationary period, you had to go through what was at the time called STT, SEAL Tactical Training. And that's really the nuts and bolts of and the tactics and the tools of the trade, if you will, and the craft, because SEAL training is more like an ass kick, and it's not really the first thing, BUDS. It's not really, you're not going to become some awesome operator out of BUDS. It's not like that. That's really the test. Who will, no matter how hot, how cold, how wet, how tired you are, who will be there? Who is not going to quit? Who submits to the cause, which is the team, that's greater than themselves? And that's a beautiful thing. When the folks that graduate that, that they're there with you, right? That they would rather die than let down their team. So when you get to STT, then you're going through really the actual training stuff, and then you had to take this oral, written, and practical board, which was probably the toughest thing in my life to that point. It was the highest stress thing I've ever had in my life, because imagine you had gone through all this pipeline, all this training, and then what they do is you'd walk in, and you have a board of 12, I think it was like 12 SEALs, and you have all these topic areas, of course, and you had studied, and I've never studied for anything ever in my life more than that, before then or since. I'm talking about, there's like radios that you have to study, and I knew like internal components of the radio, which is, I didn't have to know that at all. Certainly the SEALs that were giving me the board had no damn idea about those things, but I had just overstudied. So you get in there and you walk in the room, there's the panel there, and I just remember, you have this, all your uniforms all crisp and stuff, and I was shaking. I've never been this nervous in my life, and my just one hand was shaking uncontrollably. I'm standing there at attention, and I remember this guy Ron Bellum, who was I'd done some work for, who was a SEAL, and he's like, "Well, look at that hand, look at that damn hand, it's shaking, look at it, come on, let it, stop it." I'm like, I can't shake. No, but as they asked questions, I didn't get anything wrong, and my confidence just built and built and built. And then, so once you did all that, once you went through those training, and I'll give you an idea. They had me putting together guns and talking about components, talking about radio stuff, doing medical stuff. I get up to the table with the guy that was doing the medical, and he looks at me, and there's all this stuff sprung out on the table, and it was just IV, everything you need to give an IV, but in the packaging. And he looks at me and he says, "You got 2 minutes to give me an IV. Do it." And I did. I gave him the IV, but it was a very, very stressful thing. And once you pass that, then you have this huge sense of accomplishment, because now you're gonna be a SEAL. You're gonna get pinned, and have your trident.
Much more with former Navy SEAL, Iraq War veteran, and former Virginia Congressman Scott Taylor in just a moment. This is Veterans Chronicles. I'm Greg Corombos. Thanks for being with us. Our guest in this edition, once again, is former Navy SEAL Scott Taylor, who is also a veteran of Operation Iraqi Freedom and a former congressman from Virginia. We've already covered the grueling physical and mental tests he endured to become a Navy SEAL. In the next few minutes, we'll learn how the 9/11 terrorist attacks changed his plans drastically and left him eager to join the fight against terrorism. But first, he explains what happened to him immediately after getting his SEAL trident.
So you pass the boards. I was at SEAL Team 4, and then you get into a platoon. And, it's a platoon of 16 folks, and typically there's a cycle. There's about a 2-year cycle, roughly. And then again, this varies depending on the time, depending on where they are now, what team it is. But so SEAL Team 4, specifically at the time, the area of operation in the world was South and Central America. So if you're familiar with the author Louis L'Amour, who is a Western author, he wrote 500 books. So they're all the same story, but just changed the character. But when I was in high school, I used to get in trouble because I finished my work fast, and then I'd talk. So my big brother gave me this like a bag of books of 26 books, and he's like, "Hey, you should just read when you get in trouble." And it was Louis L'Amour. So they're all Westerns, right? Well, when we graduated from BUDS, from Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL training, each instructor, they had instructors from each team, and that instructor would talk about their area of operation in the world and how it was. And the SEAL Team 4 instructor comes up and he says, the South America, it's like the wild, wild west. And I said, that's where I'm going. Because Louis L'Amour, I'd read all these spaghetti westerns, and I'm like, I'm going to South America. So anyway, so SEAL Team 4 was that's where their operation was, doing counter-drug stuff, doing foreign internal defense, which is teaching host nations, special forces, and militaries, and building capacity with our partner nations. And so I was in a platoon, 2-year cycle, and inside of that 2-year cycle, you hit every single block of training that you need in preparation for deployment. So that as a brand new guy, there were 3 new guys in my platoon, and we were. It was fascinating. That's when you really hone your craft. If you're not on deployment or at war, you're preparing and you're training for it. So that's what we did. And then once we right towards the end, actually it wasn't 6 months. We deployed for 8 months. It was all throughout South and Central America.
So how many members in the platoon?
16.
What kind of brotherhood does that build when you're working in a group that small?
It builds tremendous capacity for trust. And again, I talked about the type of person that you have there. You also have your own problems. Sometimes guys go outside, go out back and beat the hell out of each other. It just depends. And then they walk back in, everything's fine. So 16, and you're living with them, training with them, traveling with them, more than your own families, right? So you really do develop a brotherhood. That's very tight bonds.
Were you still down there on 9/11?
So I got on 9/11. I had just gotten back from deployment in August of 2001. And then I'd actually, at that point, in August 2001, I knew that I had about a year left, I guess, in that deployment, because I came in '97, and I was going to get out and go to school, go to college. But that changed everything. So I actually re-enlisted early, to go to war. So I mean that changed, obviously, for not just for myself, but it changed everything for everybody in the military, and has changed a generation and has changed our country.
Is that a decision you knew as soon as you saw what had happened?
Of course.
Yeah. So what did that mean for you in terms of where you were and where you were sent?
So what's interesting is, because, as I said, each team had an area of operation in the world, we were not structured correctly to be able to go straight to Afghanistan. So when Afghanistan popped off, the West Coast largely had Asia and Central Asia and those areas. The East Coast did not. In fact, I think we had one from all the teams there. We had like one team in Afghanistan. One platoon. And so not a team is a bunch of platoons, right? There's just one platoon, 16 folks there, and those guys were very, very busy. So everybody on the East Coast, though, was chomping at the bit, to get to Afghanistan to go to war, obviously, because our country was attacked. But we still had obligations around the world. So my next deployment after that actually was back to South and Central America, because we had to cover that. And what happened was this huge reorganization in the SEAL teams called Force 21 that enabled us to surge people to help with the war effort. But we weren't doing that before my commitment to go back down to South America. So I'm still down in South America.
We have about a minute left before we take our next break here. So when did you find out that ultimately you would be sent into the theater, but in Iraq?
So then from that other deployment, then they sent me to training department. So I was a sniper, and they wanted me to teach marksmanship and reconnaissance for 2 years. As soon as I got there was a sniper trip to Afghanistan, and they said, hey, I said, I want to go, and they're like, well, you just got here. There's other people that have been here for a while. I said, oh, really? Well, I just came off deployment. All my bags are packed. I'm trained up to be deployment. Are theirs packed? Are they ready to go? And by the way, I haven't been trained up to train other people yet. And they're like, yeah, that's right. You're on the trip. So that trip was a sniper trip to Afghanistan, and it ended up getting canceled. So here I am trying to get to the war, and that gets canceled. And then fast forward a few months later, a similar type sniper trip, which I'm sure we'll talk about, to Iraq, got there, and I was able to get on that one.
That's U.S. Navy SEAL veteran Scott Taylor, also a veteran of Operation Iraqi Freedom. In just a moment, we'll hear about Taylor's service in Iraq and the injuries he suffered there. We'll also learn how his military service eventually transitioned into public service, and how his military experience prepared him for that work. A quick reminder that you can find many veteran oral histories at the American Veterans Center YouTube page. You can also keep up with us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at AVC Update. I'm Greg Corumbus. We'll be right back. You are listening to Veterans Chronicles. I'm Greg Corumbus. Our guest this week is former U.S. Navy SEAL Scott Taylor, who is also a veteran of Operation Iraqi Freedom. We just heard how his deployment to Afghanistan was canceled, but we pick up his story as he and his unit were sent to fight in Iraq.
So again, we know that I was a little bit bummed. Obviously, the Afghanistan sniper trip gets canceled, but then so I continued for months to teach marksmanship and reconnaissance to other. As I told you, we had those training blocks before you deploy. So one of the training blocks was marksmanship and reconnaissance, and that's what I was doing, teaching other SEALs. So we get a call several months later from the XO, which is the number 2 in command of SEAL Team 4, and he called over to my command asking for me personally to come on a trip as a sniper to augment the platoons there in Iraq. So basically, I went there with this unit of, I think there were 3 or 4 of us, not many, like maybe 5, that were just snipers. And at the time, all the platoons that were in Iraq, or just about most of the platoon, I think just about all the platoons, were doing what's called PSD. So they were doing, so if you think Secret Service work for the president, right? All these platoons mandated by our then President Bush, they were protecting the president, the prime minister, and so on of Iraq. So they were that's what they were doing. Boring work, right? Babysitting work. Not a mission that SEALs had traditionally done and probably didn't want to do, right? So, but I didn't have to do that. So I went there and I worked directly for this warrant officer who was the head for me as a SEAL. And right out of the gate, we get there and we get to Iraq and went to this little small forward operating base with 2 platoons from SEAL Team 10. And while we were there, we were going to transition from there in a couple days, going to Baghdad. But while we were there, happened to be, a mission that came up, a direct action mission that was to either, kill or capture this bomb maker. And the platoons, I knew all the guys there. They're all my contemporaries, so I knew them. And they asked me to join in on the mission. I'm like, of course, hell yes, let's do it. And they asked me to lead the external security unit. So basically, we had this, we went in, and for example, it was this guy and his people were supposed to be on the second floor of this building, and the guys are going to blow the door and go up the stairs and get him. But as soon as they blew the door to go up the stairs, my unit, my element outside, we were into the second floor windows. We were putting explosives in there. Not explosives to harm them, but explosives to discombobulate them, to give the guys time run up the stairs to get them. And then, of course, as external security, we were in a pretty bad hot zone, and that's known for insurgent activity and stuff like that. So as soon as we did that, then I was in charge of everybody in external security to make sure if anybody came on, that we were handling that issue. And it went off flawlessly. I mean, they blew the door. Our guys blew the windows, to discombobulate them. There was smoke and dust everywhere. It was crazy because it's in this, this Iraqi town. And they grabbed him. We got out of there, and then we saw actually the Iraqi army was coming down the street. We hadn't talked to them, so we didn't always tell them when we were doing things, of course, for obvious reasons. If there was leaks and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But we were able to get out. We got out of there, got him. They interrogated him and whatever else. But it went off flawlessly. That was one of the first couple of days I was in Iraq, which was great. So from there, I went to Baghdad. We convoyed into Baghdad, and as a sniper element, we would do overwatches for the Army, overwatches for the Marines. So in Iraq, the cities were separated, or with here's a sector, this is the Army sector, here's the Marines, and they patrol it every day and do whatever. So obviously they would have checkpoints sometimes, and so we would either do sniper overwatches for them to make sure that they were safe, or we would use them we would go on patrols with them to look for potential sniper hides where we might stay for 3 to 5 days. And then once we were able to get work, we were actually just finding work. And then we'd go to the platoons, which again, were protecting the Prime Minister and the President, all that stuff like that. We go to the platoons and grab their snipers and take them on ops with us. They're bored. They're of course like, yes, let's definitely do that. So we did that for a little while in Baghdad. And then it sort of slowed down a little bit in Baghdad. So I heard that things were going, popping off, if you will, out west, out in Ramadi, and then so I used I used some contacts I had to get out west. It was the same contacts. There was this thing called the Marne Express, which was kind of like a helicopter taxi that would go between forward operating bases, and I'd jump on the Marne Express and go to a different forward operating base and look for sniper work. And I'd liaise with the Army or the Marines and say, hey, who needs work and stuff like that to find work, basically. And but eventually I was able to take a helicopter out to Ramadi. Now in Ramadi, it was Ramadi was bad. Ramadi was like, think Mad Max and the Thunderdome type thing. It was pretty crazy. So in Ramadi, there was, same thing. Marines owned part of the city, and the Army owned part of the city, and they had this Army base called Junction City, which is on the Euphrates River. And in the corner of Junction City was this house. We called it Shark Base, and it was all SEAL snipers, almost all exclusively from the West Coast guys, and then us as East Coast guys when we came in there. But it was all SEAL snipers. Then there was, if I remember correctly, it was like a House of Army Rangers, and then Delta Force, and then some CIA folks. So it was a pretty rough street, if you will, right? And all it was really coming up with sniper missions. And we almost, when I got out there, it seemed like every other day or something like that, we were out doing sniper missions, staying 3 to 5 days, and sometimes overnight, just depend on what it was, in houses to look for insurgents. And in between that, you had the Iraqi government center, right? So you had the Iraqi government there for Ramadi, and the Marines were there in firing positions and fighting positions to allow for that government to continue, right? And we would go through and we would do this anti-sniper sweep for them. So when you went up on the rooftop, all the Marines, sandbags everywhere, the young Marines there, and I made it a point every time I was there to go and speak to them all the time, just to talk to them. A lot of them are very young and edgy, quite frankly, and on edge, excuse me. I mean, all the buildings around that government center just riddled with bullet holes. They had been fired at so many times. And we had this technology called the TLOS, and that what it did was it could see sniper scope shadow looking at you, right? So we would go do this anti-sniper sweep for them every day almost to make sure that they were okay. But this sniper house that we had, it was really, we did these missions, and you would also do like bait ops. You could almost be creative with how you did it. And bait ops is when you exactly what it sounds like. You have bait basically to be able to draw people out, and so it was a very interesting thing. And you would the house itself. I think one of the first nights we were there, we get there and there were too many people in the house, so we were out in a GP tent outside, and that base was getting mortared every day. So the base was getting mortared every day, and I remember one of the first nights we were there, we're sitting in the tent, and you hear the sound of a mortar coming in. It was like coming in, and I'm not kidding. I mean everybody in that damn tent were hauling butt to get in the house. It was like you couldn't get out of that tent fast enough to get in there, and so eventually we got to move into the house, which was great. You didn't have to worry about the damn mortars, but the house itself had a makeshift sight-in range. So every time before you would go out on a mission, you go up to the roof and make sure your gun's sighted in, but those guys had taken fire. I never had, but there were guys that were before us that were up on the rooftop, and they had taken fire before from across the river. So you'd go sight your gun in, but you're crouched down to walk over, so you weren't exposing yourself to the folks that were across the street. But in that area, one of the worst things about Ramadi were just the roadside bombs. I mean, while we were there, I was actually just looking at my email list of when I was over there, and I remembered I was writing to folks, and we had lost like 10, 12 Marines in like a few days or something that were in Ramadi. And the guys that were in the house with me, it never happened to me, thank God, but the guys that were in the house, they had been in explosions before as well. And I do remember one op that we were doing. I remember we get inserted into the middle of the night, and we would use the Marines in the Army to insert us and extract us and do QRF, which is quick reaction force in case you get in trouble, right? So I do remember one mission when we went in, and it was like, 2, 3 in the morning, and we're on night vision goggles going through the city, and as soon as we get dropped off by the convoy, I'm the rear security, so I'm the guy closest to the road as we just patrolled. And oftentimes, one convoy would come through, and it would wake up the bomb maker, right? And it was the next convoy that would get clacked off and hit. So we get dropped off, another Marine convoy comes through, and they get hit. And it's probably 50 yards behind me. And so they get blown up, and we sit, take a knee real quick, looking around, making sure that there's not another follow-on attack or something like that. And seeing and listening on the radio to see if they were able to take care of themselves or if we had to go help out, because we were also on a separate mission. And I remember them getting a call, or I remember hearing in the radio, they were like, "Do you have friendlies in the area?" Because there was a helicopter came over as well too, and they were like, "Are there any friendlies in the area?" And they were like, the Marines that just got blown up, they were like, "No, we don't have any friendlies in the area." So we're like, uh-oh, because we don't want that helicopter to unload on us, blue. So our radio guys, obviously for them, they just got hit, so they're all, they're dealing with those issues, and our radio man was able to calm them down, and say, no, you got a SEAL element in the area, please don't shoot us up, basically. And but I think, I don't know how much time we have, but I'll talk to you about when I actually got injured, So we were doing these missions, these sniper missions, quite often, and it was a fascinating experience for me, but it all came to an end. My vacation in Iraq came to an end because we were doing this mission, and this specific mission we were supposed to observe this intersection, and in this intersection there were known insurgents that would come out of the intersection to launch attacks on coalition forces. They would meet there and stuff. So we were supposed to go in this building that was supposed to be empty, and we would stay there for 3 to 5 days observing this intersection. So we make our way. The Marines drop us off. We make our way through the streets, and typically, like I told you about the first op we did, you blow the door and you go in. Well, this is different. As a sniper mission, it's quiet, right? And you don't want to give off any light signature because you don't want anybody to know that you're there, because you might be there 3 to 5 days. So we sneak into the building. We keep our night vision goggles on. so as not to give off any light. And we're clearing each room because even though it's supposed to be an empty building, you still want to take it down as though there might be insurgents in there because it could go bad, right? So we're clearing each room, methodically clearing each room, and we go up to the second deck, the second floor, and I remember turning to hold security on the third deck stairwell and then falling right through the floor. And I fell about, 20 feet or so to the concrete below, and I'm instantly unconscious. And what's interesting is, and I'll talk about this in a second, because I'm out cold, so my recollection was a little bit different. And then I saw the medic, about 5 years later, who filled me in with everything. And so I'm out cold. I had a concussion, a pneumothorax, a bruised lung, a torn PCL tendon, and 6 broken ribs down my spine. So I'm down, but the unit continues on, right? You want to win the fight first before you attend to any of your folks. So they continue to clear the building to make sure there's no one in there. And then my medic, Petty Officer Stout, comes up to me, and he hears my breathing or lack thereof. Basically, it was extremely slow and labored. And so what he did was he took a J tube and put it in my throat and opened my airway and potentially saved my life. He didn't stop there though. He made sure my spine was okay, and then he called in the medevac. So that year, the medevac were the Marines, of course, so they were going to come in, and between that building and the helicopter was a pretty long road that we had lost a lot of Marines that year. So it was a very IED laden road. So he stabilizes me, he gives me morphine, and then he actually rode with the Humvees to take me to make sure that I arrived safely at the helicopter. And of course I didn't know this at the time, but he told me later. I saw him at a fundraiser, and he said, yeah, you were out cold the whole time. You woke up a little bit because on the way, the Humvees on the way to the helicopter, there was some ice or something that like a cooler that fell with ice and like woke us up and stuff. But he made sure I got safe to the helicopter. But then he had to go back to to rejoin the team. And as I told you earlier, a lot of times the first convoy goes through, wakes up the guy, and then the second one is where people get hit. But thank God, nothing happened. He was able to get back, rejoin the team. They were able to finish the mission. And I was on the helicopter, and the first time I recall waking up, I couldn't move very well because I was strapped in very tightly, and I couldn't really feel anything because they'd give me morphine. And I just thought to myself, I'm paralyzed. This sucks. I'm paralyzed. And then I passed back out. And then I wake up again, and I'm in the 10 hospital in Balad. And the first thing I did was grab my legs, and then I grabbed between my legs, and I said, "Thank you, God, I'm not paralyzed." And so I was in the Balad hospital for a couple of days, breathing down that pneumothorax, and then I made my way and got medevaced out through Germany back home, where my mom waited for me in the airport and received me. So that was the end of my vacation in Iraq.
Vacation. How long did it take you to fully recover?
Months. I mean, you had I still have a torn PCL tendon in my knee. I mean, let me preface this by saying there are people who are way worse than me. I'm fine. I'm fine. But the PCL tendon I had to rehab that knee because it's still torn. But there's stability in it, so I didn't have to get surgery. And then just ribs those injuries, and anybody out there that's broken ribs, you understand how bad it sucks when you sneeze, so it just takes a little while to heal.
So when did you leave the service? How soon after that?
So I finished out my tour, which was that was in July, and let me also say that was one of the toughest times in my life because that was I was injured 3 or 4 days before Operation Red Wings. So Lone Survivor, folks have seen the movie and stuff like that. They're all my buddies on the helicopter, and I remember I was actually in the tent hospital, and they're reaching out to me to see if I'm okay. And those are some of the emails I looked at yesterday too. They're to see if I'm fine, and then one of my buddies who was in Baghdad at the time, his brother was there, and he starts corresponding with me and is like, "Hey, I have some really bad news. Helicopter went down. I'm not sure if my brother was on it or not, but because there are no names yet." And then eventually his brother didn't. His brother was on the other helicopter. But of course, we all know what happened in Operation Red Wing, and we lost all those folks. So it was a really tough time for all of us in the SEAL community. When something like that happens, everybody knows someone on there. When I came back, I went to the funeral, which was the most beautiful thing and the most horrible thing I've ever witnessed. till that time, because there's been worse things since then. But so I was supposed to scheduled to get out in November of that year, and I did. I just finished out my tour, and I transitioned out.
The SEAL funeral. I know there's a tradition with the casket. What happens there with the?
So the tradition is, and unfortunately I've done this and been to more funerals than I wish on anyone. But you go when the casket's there. Each SEAL member comes in and they take their trident, which is obviously their insignia or the pin. They take that off and then they pound it onto the coffin.
So when you left the service, not too long after that, you decided to run for Congress in 2010. That one didn't work out, but you then got elected to the Virginia House of Delegates, and then ultimately in 2016 elected to Congress. Two questions on this front. First of all, what do you think your military service means in terms of helping you do this type of public service, and what military issues are you most passionate about as a member of Congress?
Sure. So when I got out, like you said, I did some real estate stuff, and then I went back and forth to Yemen over about 3 or 4 years for about 10 deployments or trips as a civilian, doing stuff there, doing security stuff. Got involved in politics because I started to pay attention, and I just felt like I have a heart for service. I want to improve things. I want to help people. I want to solve problems. And I felt like in 2010, of course, the country was in a big transition, and I threw my hat in the ring. Lost, learned a lot, of course, and then, as you said, went to the House of Delegates and served 2 terms there. And then when my congressman started to retire, said he was going to retire, we jumped up, and here we are. I think a couple things that are very important from my service that really help in the political world is politics is a team sport to get things done. I understand how to operate in a very elite level in a team, and what that means, and what it means to serve a cause greater than yourself and put the team before yourself. I think that translates very well. Now, granted, there are a lot of, the team isn't the same, because you're not, the makeup of the team now is not the same as it was then in terms of everyone being under that same mentality. But you can make a difference because you can lead. You can lead, and you can help people see that, right, and bring them together for a purpose, right? So the teamwork thing's a big deal. I think the ability to see clarity in chaos, and when you think about the world today and you think about how divisive the country is and the chaos that's going on, and regardless of whose fault it is, that's what we have, right? So, from my background and folks like me, you're able to think with clarity and chaos. I mean, this is nothing, right? All the stuff that's happening political, it's nothing. We're able to move forward and make decisions under pressure without worrying about the other stuff. So I think that's extremely helpful in this environment, especially. So, and people see that, I think, and that's not just with me, but there are other veterans as well who have the same sort of qualities. And I think it's important that veterans get involved. Not only that, but you're less partisan necessarily. Veterans tend to see, okay, here's an issue, we gotta get it solved. I don't care, you're black, white, brown, gay, straight, who cares? No one cares. We have to solve this problem. Let's do it. And that's a good quality for all veterans, and then it helps with continued service in the political arena. For me personally, as I told you, my district has more veterans in active duty than anyone in the nation. So having a strong military is extremely important for me personally, and I believe for not just my district but also the country, and then veterans, of course. I mean so in the strong military space we work in all the time, the same thing with veterans, making sure that they're cared for, making sure that this generation, who quite frankly has shouldered the burden for the last 16 years for the nation, less than 1% of the population, them and their families, because let's not forget, we're only as strong as our families who back us up. So dealing in the veteran space is extremely important for me, and reforming the VA to reflect the realities of today, and modernizing the healthcare there, and the wait times, and all the stuff that you've heard about in the VA. And then lastly, economy and jobs, which is important. If you're going to have a strong military, you got to have a strong economy.
Last topic, you wrote a book largely critical of national security policy. I know some folks thought that perhaps you stepped out too far from what is usually a fairly secretive line of work in the military with the Navy SEALs, and others obviously welcome the fact that you were shining lights on some problems. Talk about that experience just a little bit, and why you ultimately decided to write the book.
Sure. Well, I think I was unhappy. That's the only reason why I ran for Congress in 2010, where the country was going. I think that some of the national security policies, for example, using leaks, as we all know in Washington that happens, but using those leaks that with national security secrets to move a political agenda forward, I think is dangerous, puts people's lives at jeopardy. It's something that I felt very strongly about. Foreign policy as well, I think operating on policy as how you wish the world to be as opposed to how it actually is, I think is also very dangerous. I mean, the world, and veterans understand this, veterans who've been around the world, they understand that, a lot of those policies, or at least maybe the majority did, that are very naive. It's very naive to think that. So and that happens on Republican and Democrat side. We've had veterans who have gone forth and they've been in these other countries. They understand the populations, the culture, identity, the tribalisms, and the tribal customs and stuff like that predate religion. And trying to create overarching policy that doesn't take those things into account is naive and dangerous. So I just felt compelled to write it. Sure, typically in the SEAL teams, you don't necessarily step out all the time. But if you look at our book and everything like that, and even now, you don't hear me talking about specific missions or taking undue credit for myself, because the reality is there's people who've done so much more than me for this country, and I just had the honor to be able to serve beside them. So it's I want to tout them, I want to tout what they did, but and that's what I do now in public office, and I'll continue to do that. But I did feel compelled to write that, and now, as a leader in this country, I'm compelled to act on it. I'm compelled to make sure that our policies reflect the best interest for our national security, our foreign policy, and for this nation.
Scott Taylor, U.S. Navy SEAL and a veteran of Operation Iraqi Freedom. He also served as a member of Congress from Virginia and was serving in that role at the time of our interview. I'm Greg Corombos, and this is Veterans Chronicles. Hi, this is Greg Corombos, and thanks for listening to Veterans Chronicles, a presentation of the American Veterans Center. For more information, please visit AmericanVeteransCenter.org. You can also follow the American Veterans Center on Facebook, and on Twitter, we're at AVC Update. Subscribe to the American Veterans Center YouTube channel for full oral histories and special features, and of course, please subscribe to the Veterans Chronicles podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and please join us next time for Veterans Chronicles.